When the estate was opened up to the public and Priscilla was put in charge, she pushed the family aside, and we were never invited to anything or asked to be or speak at anything at Graceland.
3 days after Elvis Presley died on the bathroom floor at Graceland, Priscilla Presley sat alone in his private office. The room still smelled like him, cigars and cologne. The desk was covered in unopened mail, unpaid bills, and contracts he never read. She stacked them into piles, organized what he could not. Then she picked up the phone. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, stood outside the front gates of Graceland that same afternoon. He was 70 years old. He had raised his son in a 2-room house in Tupelo. He had watched him become the biggest star in the world. He had buried his wife. And now, less than a week after burying his only son, he could not get past the security guard at the entrance. The guard apologized, said he was just following orders. Vernon asked whose orders. The guard did not answer. This is not a story about grief. It is a story about power, about a woman who walked away from Elvis 5 years before he died and then returned to control everything he left behind, about a family that built him, raised him, and loved him, and then watched as they were erased from his legacy, about decisions made in silence, in lawyers' offices, behind closed doors, while the world mourned a king. And it begins with a question nobody wanted to ask out loud. Why would the woman who divorced Elvis Presley suddenly inherit his empire? The answer is buried in a will he never changed, a father too broken to fight, and 72 hours that rewrote history. Elvis and Priscilla's divorce was finalized in October 1973. The headlines called it amicable. They were photographed leaving the courthouse holding hands, smiling. Priscilla told reporters they would always be family. Elvis nodded and said nothing. The cameras loved it. America wanted to believe the king could do divorce differently, that he could stay friends with the woman he married, stay close to the daughter they shared, stay intact. He tried. Priscilla stayed on his payroll. He bought her a house in Los Angeles, paid her bills, sent her money when she needed it, and sometimes when she did not. He called her late at night from hotel rooms in Vegas, from tour buses in the Midwest, from his bedroom at Graceland when the pills kicked in and the loneliness became unbearable. He asked her how Lisa Marie was doing, asked if she was happy, asked if she ever thought about coming back. She never did. But she also never left completely. She visited Graceland for holidays, brought Lisa Marie to see her father when his schedule allowed it, which was rarely. She attended his shows when she was in town, sat in the audience and watched him perform, watched him sweat through his jumpsuit, watched him forget lyrics he had sung 1,000 times. She saw what everyone else saw, a man unraveling in slow motion. And Elvis saw her seeing it. He never updated his will. It was written in 1977, just months before he died, but it reflected a life that no longer existed. Priscilla was named in it, not as his wife, because she was not his wife anymore, but as the mother of his only child, as the trustee of Lisa Marie's inheritance, as someone he still trusted even after everything. Vernon Presley was named the executor. He was supposed to manage the estate, make the decisions, protect what Elvis had built. But Vernon was not a businessman. He was a father, a grieving, exhausted father who had already buried his wife and was about to bury his son. He had a heart condition, high blood pressure. He could barely read the legal documents people kept shoving in front of him. Elvis knew this. He also knew his father would do whatever Priscilla told him to do. When Elvis died on August 16, 1977, Graceland was not just a mansion. It was a small economy. Cooks, maids, security guards, groundskeepers, musicians, drivers, assistants, and family members all lived off the same payroll. His cousins worked in the house. His uncle Vesta manned the front gate. His aunt Delta lived in a room on the first floor and cooked his meals. His bodyguards traveled with him, protected him, stayed up with him when the insomnia got bad. They were not employees, they were family. They were the people who knew him before he was Elvis, before the fame, before the money, before the world decided he belonged to everyone. And they believed they would always have a place in his world. Because Elvis told them they would. He promised his father he would be taken care of, promised his grandmother before she died that the family would never go without, promised his bodyguards they would have jobs for life. He meant it when he said it. He meant everything when he said it. But Elvis also spent money like it was infinite. He bought cars for strangers, handed out diamond rings to women he barely knew, chartered private jets for trips he cancelled at the last minute, gave his friends Cadillacs for Christmas, bought horses he never rode, built a racquetball court he used twice, renovated Graceland over and over, tearing down walls and adding rooms and changing his mind halfway through. Colonel Tom Parker took 50% of everything Elvis earned, sometimes more. The contracts were ironclad, the deals were terrible. Elvis knew it, everyone around him knew it, but he did not fight it. He was too tired, too medicated, too trapped. By the time he died, his estate was worth $5 million. He owed $7 million. The IRS was circling, creditors were lining up, Graceland was bleeding money, the tour had stopped generating profit, the albums were not selling like they used to. His last performances were sad, bloated, painful to watch. He forgot words, slurred sentences, fell asleep on stage. He died broke. Not publicly, the world still thought he was rich, still thought Graceland was a palace of endless wealth, but inside those gates, the money was gone, and the people who depended on him had no idea. Vernon knew. He had tried to talk to Elvis about it, tried to get him to slow down, to stop spending, to fire the colonel. Elvis waved him off, told him not to worry, said it would all work out. It did not work out. 3 days after Elvis died, Priscilla Presley walked into Graceland with a team of lawyers. She did not come alone, she did not come to mourn, she came to take control. And the family that raised Elvis Presley was about to learn what it feels like to be erased. August 17, 1977. Priscilla Presley landed in Memphis less than 24 hours after Elvis died. She did not come from Los Angeles alone. She brought her lawyer, her financial advisor, a publicist who specialized in crisis management. They checked into a hotel near Graceland and held a meeting that lasted 3 hours. Nobody from the family was invited. Vernon Presley had not slept. He sat in the living room at Graceland, surrounded by people he did not recognize. Reporters camped outside the gates. Fans sobbed on the lawn. Flowers piled so high the staff could not keep up. The phone rang every 30 seconds. Lawyers, accountants, record executives, people asking questions Vernon could not answer. He was 70 years old. His son was dead. His heart was failing, and someone kept putting documents in front of him that required his signature. Priscilla walked into Graceland the next morning. She hugged Vernon, kissed him on the cheek, told him she was there to help. He believed her. He had no reason not to. She was still Lisa Marie's mother. She had been part of the family for 14 years. She knew how things worked. She knew the people. She knew the business. Or so he thought. Within hours, she was making decisions. She told the staff which rooms to close off, which phone calls to take, which reporters were allowed to ask questions and which ones were not. She instructed the security team to create a new access list for Graceland. Names were added, other names were removed. Nobody questioned it, not yet. Grief has a way of making people compliant. When someone steps into the chaos with confidence, with a plan, with the appearance of control, people follow. They assume that person knows something they do not. They assume that person has permission. Priscilla did not wait for permission. She scheduled a meeting with Vernon's lawyer, then with the accountant who handled Elvis's finances, then with the estate's probate attorney. She asked for copies of the will, for financial statements, for a full audit of Elvis's assets and liabilities. She wanted to know exactly what was left, what was owed, what could be saved. The numbers were worse than anyone admitted publicly. Elvis Presley died owing more money than he had. The tour were profitable, but the expenses were catastrophic. The payroll at Graceland alone was unsustainable. 20 people on staff, most of them family, most of them doing jobs that could have been done by 5. The cars, the planes, the gifts, the prescription drugs that cost thousands of dollars a month, the settlements paid quietly to women who threatened to go public, the loans taken out against future earnings that would never come. Colonel Tom Parker was still entitled to 50% of everything, even in death. The contracts did not end just because Elvis did. Parker had already called Vernon twice, reminded him of their agreement, made it clear he expected his cut of the estate, of the merchandising, of whatever money could still be squeezed from the name. Vernon did not know how to fight him. He barely understood what Parker was saying, the legal language, the percentages, the clauses buried in contracts signed 20 years ago. Priscilla understood. She had watched Elvis sign those contracts, watched him hand over control of his career, his image, his music, watched Parker manipulate him, isolate him, drain him. She had tried to warn Elvis, tried to get him to hire new representation, to walk away, to protect himself. He never did. Now she would. But first she needed authority, legal authority, the kind that could not be questioned or undone. Vernon was the executor of the estate, but he was old, sick, overwhelmed. Priscilla's lawyer suggested they file for co-executorship, argued that Vernon needed help, that the estate was too complicated for one person to manage, that Priscilla, as Lisa Marie's mother and as someone who understood Elvis's business, was the logical choice. Vernon signed the papers. He did not read them carefully. He trusted her. He wanted the help. He wanted someone else to make the decisions so he could grieve in peace. The court approved it. Priscilla Presley was now legally in control of Elvis's estate, alongside Vernon. But Vernon was fading. His health was declining. He spent most of his days in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting to join his son. Priscilla did not wait. She started making cuts. The first to go were the Memphis Mafia, the bodyguards, the drivers, the guys who had been with Elvis since the beginning. She called them into the office one by one, told them the estate could not afford to keep them on payroll, thanked them for their service, gave them 2 weeks' notice. Some of them had worked for Elvis for 20 years. They had protected him, traveled with him, stayed up all night when he could not sleep, listened to him talk about his fears, his regrets, his loneliness. They were not just employees, they were his closest friends. They were also expensive. Priscilla did not see friends. She saw line items. She saw salaries that no longer served a purpose. She saw people who were loyal to Elvis, not to her, people who might resist the changes she was about to make. She fired them all. The cooks were next, then the housekeepers, then the grounds crew. She kept a skeleton staff, the bare minimum needed to keep Graceland functional. Everyone else was let go. Some were given severance, others were not. It depended on how long they had been there, how much Elvis had promised them, how much Priscilla felt obligated to honor those promises. Most of the time, she did not. The extended family members who lived at Graceland were told they needed to find other arrangements. Cousins who had stayed in guest rooms for years were asked to leave. Relatives who showed up unannounced, expecting meals and hospitality, were turned away at the gate. The same gate where Vernon's brother Vesta had worked for 2 decades, checking IDs, waving in deliveries, keeping fans from climbing the fence. Priscilla kept him on, but she renegotiated his pay, told him the estate could not afford what Elvis had been paying him, offered him minimum wage, told him to take it or leave it. He took it. He had nowhere else to go. Nobody fought her, not openly. They were too shocked, too heartbroken, too afraid of losing what little they had left. Priscilla was not cruel. She was calm, professional. She framed every decision as necessary, as something Elvis would have wanted if he had understood the numbers. But Elvis never cared about the numbers. He cared about the people. Priscilla cared about survival. And then she did something nobody expected, something that would change everything. She announced that Graceland would be opened to the public. Not as a memorial, not as a tribute, as a business, a tourist attraction, a museum where people could pay to walk through the rooms where Elvis lived, see the clothes he wore, stand in front of the grave where he was buried. Vernon was horrified. This was his son's home, the place where Elvis had felt safe, where he had raised his daughter, where he had died. Priscilla did not care about sentiment. She cared about cash flow. Graceland was bleeding money. The estate was drowning in debt. The IRS was preparing to seize assets. If something did not change, everything Elvis built would be sold off piece by piece. Opening Graceland was the only way to save it. But it meant turning his private life into a public spectacle. It meant tourists walking through his bedroom, taking photos of his piano, lining up to see his grave. It meant the people who loved him most would have to buy tickets to visit him. And that is exactly what happened. June 1982. Graceland opened to the public on a Thursday morning. The line stretched down Elvis Presley Boulevard before the sun came up. Thousands of people, cameras, tour buses, families wearing matching shirts with his face on them. They paid $5 each to walk through the front door, to stand in the rooms where he lived, to see the jungle room, the gold records on the walls, the peacock-stained glass windows he installed himself. They walked past the kitchen where his Aunt Delta used to cook his breakfast, past the bedroom where he collapsed, past the bathroom where he died. They took photos, bought souvenirs, stood in front of his grave and cried. Priscilla stood near the entrance that first day and watched them come in. She did not smile. She did not speak to the press. She watched the cash registers, watched the tickets sell out, watched the parking lot fill up with cars from 30 states. By the end of the first year, Graceland had made enough money to pay off half the debt. Vernon Presley never saw it. He died in 1979, 2 years after his son, heart failure. He spent the last months of his life in bed, asking why strangers were walking through his home, asking why his brother was working for minimum wage, asking why the people who loved Elvis were being erased. Nobody gave him a good answer. Priscilla did not attend his funeral. She sent flowers, a card. Her lawyer released a statement on her behalf. It said she was grieving privately, that she needed space, that Vernon had been like a father to her. The family did not believe it. They believed she was relieved that the one person who could have fought her was gone, the one person whose name was on the will before hers, the one person who had legal authority to stop her. Now there was no one. Vesta Presley kept working the gate at Graceland. He wore a uniform Priscilla's management team gave him. He checked tickets, directed traffic, answered questions from tourists who asked if he knew Elvis personally. He told them Elvis was his nephew, that he had watched him grow up, that he used to sit on the porch with him and talk about cars and girls and what it felt like to be famous. The tourists asked for autographs. Vesta signed them. He did not get paid extra for it. He worked at Graceland until he was too old to stand for 8 hours, until his knees gave out and his back could not take it anymore. He asked for a pension, for something to live on, for recognition of the 30 years he had spent protecting that gate. He got a thank you card, no pension, no severance, no acknowledgement that he had been there since the beginning. He died broke. Delta Presley, Elvis's aunt, lived in a small room on the first floor of Graceland. She had lived there since Elvis bought the house in 1957. She cooked his meals, cleaned his clothes, stayed up with him when he could not sleep. She was family, not staff, family. When Graceland became a museum, she was told she could stay, but only in that one room. The tourists would not go in there. It was off limits, private. She could live there as long as she stayed out of sight. She spent her final years in that room, listening to strangers walk past her door, listening to tour guides tell stories about Elvis that were not true, listening to people laugh in the hallways where she used to make him laugh. She died in that room in 1993, alone, forgotten. The bodyguards who had protected Elvis, who had traveled with him, who had been fired days after he died, tried to move on. Some of them wrote books, told their stories, tried to make a living off the years they spent by his side. Priscilla's legal team sent cease and desist letters, told them they were violating intellectual property rights, that they could not use Elvis's name or image without permission, that any profits made from those books would be subject to legal action. Some of them fought it, spent money they did not have on lawyers, lost. Others gave up, sold their stories for almost nothing, faded into obscurity. The musicians who played with Elvis, who toured with him, who recorded with him, were not invited to Graceland after it opened. They were not asked to participate in documentaries or anniversaries or tribute events. They were not included in the official narrative Priscilla was building. They were edited out. Priscilla did not do this out of cruelty. She did it out of control. She needed to own the story, to shape the legacy, to decide what people remembered and what they forgot. Elvis had been chaos, spending, addiction, bad decisions, broken promises. She turned him into a brand. A clean, profitable, controlled brand, one that could be sold to families, to tourists, to corporations who wanted to license his image for commercials and product lines, one that did not include the messy parts, the people who saw him at his worst, the people who knew too much. The people who loved him when he was not famous yet. She fired them, silenced them, erased them, not because they were bad people, not because they did not deserve to be remembered, but because they were in the way. And the world believed her version, the sanitized version, the version where Elvis was a tragic hero who died too young, where Graceland was a beautiful memorial, where Priscilla was the devoted ex-wife who saved his legacy from ruin. Nobody asked about the family. Nobody asked what happened to the people who raised him. Nobody asked why his uncle worked for minimum wage at the house his nephew bought, why his aunt died alone in a back room while tourists took selfies 10 feet away. Nobody asked because nobody knew. Priscilla made sure of it. She controlled the interviews, the documentaries, the books, the museum exhibits. She decided which stories were told and which ones were buried. She decided who got to speak and who did not. And the people who were there from the beginning, the people who knew Elvis before he was Elvis, were left with nothing. No money, no recognition, no voice. They were ghosts in his story, footnotes, background characters in a legend that no longer had room for them. Some of them tried to fight back, tried to tell their side, tried to remind the world that Elvis was a son, a nephew, a cousin, a friend before he was a king. But Priscilla had the lawyers, the money, the power. She had control of the name, the image, the estate. She had everything Elvis left behind. And she made sure the people who built him got nothing. Years later, a reporter asked her if she had any regrets, if she ever thought about the people she pushed out, the family members who lost access to Graceland, the employees who were fired without severance, the men and women who gave their lives to Elvis and were left with nothing when he died. She paused, looked at the camera, smiled softly. Then she said she did what she had to do, that the estate was bankrupt, that tough decisions had to be made, that she saved Elvis from being forgotten. She did not mention the people she forgot. Priscilla Presley turned a $5 million estate into a $1 billion empire. She did it without Vernon, without the family, without the people who knew Elvis best. She did it with lawyers and accountants and brand managers who never met him, who never heard him sing in the living room at 3 in the morning, who never watched him cry over his mother, who never saw him give away his last dollar to a stranger because he could not stand the idea of anyone going without. They did not need to know that version of him. They needed to sell the other one. And she let them. Graceland became one of the most visited private homes in America, second only to the White House. Tourists came from every country. They bought tickets, T-shirts, coffee mugs, snow globes with his face inside. They stood in front of his grave and posted photos online, tagged their friends, wrote captions about how much they loved him. Most of them were not even born when he died. They did not love him. They loved the idea of him, the legend, the image Priscilla built and protected and sold, the sanitized version, the one without the pills, without the paranoia, without the isolation and the sadness and the slow unraveling that everyone around him watched happen and could not stop. That version did not sell, so it was removed. Elvis became a logo, a costume, a soundtrack to nostalgia. He was no longer a man, he was a product, and Priscilla was the CEO. She was good at it, better than anyone expected. She fought Colonel Parker in court and won, took back control of his image, his music, his name. She negotiated licensing deals, expanded the brand, turned Graceland into a destination, a pilgrimage site for people who wanted to feel close to something they never had. She made Lisa Marie rich, protected her inheritance, made sure Elvis's daughter would never struggle the way his father did, the way his family did. But she also made sure Lisa Marie inherited a myth, not a father, a brand, not the man who sang her to sleep, not the man who called her every night from the road just to hear her voice, not the man who cried when he had to leave her. Lisa Marie inherited Graceland, the business, the empire, but she did not inherit the people who built it. She did not grow up with her grandfather's stories, with her great-aunts cooking, with the bodyguards who used to make her laugh, with the musicians who played her lullabies. She grew up with Priscilla, and Priscilla taught her how to protect the brand, how to manage the legacy, how to keep the myth alive. Lisa Marie never learned how to protect the people. She died in 2023, 54 years old, heart failure, the same thing that killed her grandfather, the same thing that killed her father. She spent her life trying to live up to a man she barely knew, a man the world worshipped, a man her mother had turned into an icon. She struggled with addiction, with depression, with the weight of a name that was too big to carry. She was buried at Graceland, next to her father, next to her son, who died 2 years before her. Priscilla stood at the funeral and did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that grief was private, that emotion was a weakness, that control was the only thing that mattered. She had controlled Elvis's image for 46 years, longer than he was alive. She had outlived him, outlived his father, outlived his daughter. She had survived them all. And she still owned the story. But the people who were erased never stopped talking. They wrote books, gave interviews, told anyone who would listen what really happened, how they were pushed out, how they were silenced, how they lost everything. Most people did not believe them. The official story was too strong, too polished, too protected. Priscilla had the platform, the resources, the credibility. She had Graceland, the estate, the lawyers. They had nothing but their memories. And memories do not hold up in court. So the world kept believing Priscilla's version, kept visiting Graceland, kept buying the merchandise, kept celebrating Elvis without ever asking who paid the price for his legacy. The answer is simple. His family did. The people who loved him before the world did. The people who would have loved him even if he never became famous. The people who did not need him to be a king. They just needed him to be Elvis. Priscilla did not take that from them out of malice. She took it because she believed it was necessary, because the estate was drowning, because Lisa Marie needed protection, because the world needed a hero, not a tragedy. She believed she was saving him. And maybe she was. But she also erased the people who made him worth saving, the people who saw him at his worst and stayed anyway, the people who did not care about the money or the fame or the legend. They cared about the boy from Tupelo who never forgot where he came from, who sent money home to his family, who bought his mother a house, who promised his father he would take care of everyone. He tried, he failed, he died trying. And the people he promised to protect were left behind. Priscilla saved Elvis's name, but she buried the people who gave it meaning. Graceland still stands, the tourists still come, the money still flows, Elvis is still everywhere, on coffee mugs, on t-shirts, on television specials that air every year. But the people who built him are gone, forgotten, erased from the story they helped create. And nobody asks where they went. Nobody wonders what happened to them. Nobody questions why the family that raised the king ended up with nothing. Because Priscilla made sure nobody would. She won, she saved the legacy, she built the empire, she protected Lisa Marie, she did exactly what she said she would do. But in saving Elvis from being forgotten, she made sure the people who loved him most were erased. And that is the legacy nobody talks about. So here is the question nobody wants to answer. Was Priscilla the woman who saved Elvis from financial ruin and turned him into an eternal icon, or was she the one who erased the people who made him human? Maybe she was both. Maybe there is no clean answer. Maybe legacy always costs something. Tell us what you believe. Drop your thoughts below. And if this story made you see Elvis differently, share it with someone who needs to hear the truth.